Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm so excited today. I'm joined by the awesome Mike Lee, who wrote Fallen Angels. Welcome to my channel, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so grateful. And Mike, you're coming to us from steamy Nashville.
Steamy Nashville. That's right. Yes, for baking in the summer heat right here, right now.
Absolutely. And I'm baking in the heat of London. So it's really lovely to have you with me. As I was telling you, I've been on this Horus Heresy journey.
hmm
I've been
hmm
repulsed, appalled, I've been in tears. I feel I'm really jaded now. Just to see
Oh.
how, how how these terrible space marines can betray each other and the prime.
hmm hmm
But
hmm
I was very pleased to get back into Fallen Angels because I got to read Descent of Angels, and they're very knightly, and that kind
hmm
of plays
hmm
into my natural love of fantasy and
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah. But I was just looking, and this was published in 2009.
I know, right? This is
So,
where all the white hairs come from. It's been ages.
oh, grey hairs. Yeah, all the cool people have grey hairs. It's all good. So yeah, what do you remember about that time? It's 14 years, so a really long time. But how did you stumble into being asked to do this book?
Stumble's actually a pretty good word for it, honestly. I had just wrapped up. Well, I'd finished the Malice Darkblade 5-book series for Warhammer Fantasy. I just done Lord of Ruin, and then right after that, I was put on another book, a Space Wolf book, called Wolf's Honor. Um, that's a long story, but I was called in to kind of kind of finish up the book for the authors. Excuse me, and I had finished that. I'd gotten that done. It was kind of an ordeal, um,
I can
and out of the blue.
I can imagine
Hmm,
anything to do with space wolves is a bit of an ordeal. They just
I
seem.
love Space Wolves. Actually,
Oh,
they're one of
really?
my favorite chapters. Yeah, I love them. But it was a case where I was asked to sort of come in and kind of carry the book to the finish line. The previous authors got part of the way there and couldn't complete it, so they asked me to come in and finish it. And when you're stepping into someone else's project, that can be a real daunting challenge, right? Because you're basically being handed part of a story, and like, here, finish this in the best way you can. So that took a bit, and I was I'd either finished it or I was almost finished with it. When out of the blue, I got an email from Lindsay Priestley, my editor, and she said, "Would you like to work on a Horus Heresy book?" I'm like, "Yes, please. I'd be happy to. This is wonderful. What do you know? What do you want me to do?" She said, "Well, here's the thing. Um, we want you to do a follow up to Descent of Angels.
Hmm.
Um, the Descent of Angels had kind of a mixed reception with
Yes.
the 40K audience, because it was a very, it was an unusual sort of book compared to the others that had come before it in the Horus Heresy, and there's a lot of divided opinions on it, and so they kind of wanted to do a follow up to Descent of Angels, and I guess maybe answer some of those questions or help address some of those contentious points that the fans were having with it. So I was basically told, we want this book to start up right on the heels of Descent of Angels. So you're working right off that book. It's a direct sequel to it in a lot of ways. And then I was also then told the DMS storyline, the Siege Engine storyline of the book in Fallen Angels, that was basically given to me by Alan Merritt, who at the time was the head of IP for the company. He's like, here's what we want you to do on DMAT. And he gave me basically a sketch about, there's a planet, they're making siege engines, and these dark angels have to intervene. Like,
Okay.
okay, well, I can do that, sure. Um, but but after once you've read Descent of Angels, that whole bit where Luther and Zahariel get banished back
Hmm.
to Caliban, I'm like, well, we've got to include that too. We can't just leave that hanging. So now I'm like, well, okay, we need to split this book into two basic stories. We need to follow what's going on with Caliban and Luther, because that's going to be a very big deal with the Dark Angels history, and the way the Horus Heresy arc for the Dark Angels plays out. We've got to address that to some degree, and I got to do this thing on Diamat too.
Mhm.
So I had to break down, I had to outline both stories, figure out how to weave them together chapter by chapter, um,
Wow.
and then make sure everything lined up with Descent of Angels and lined up with a lot of the Dark Angels lore that Gav Thorpe had worked on. And it was, and even, I mean, I knew it was going to be a big challenge going into it. It was an even bigger challenge than I imagined, you know, because I had very specific marching orders I had to fulfill and address all these different issues. And it took a lot longer to do than I expected. I think it took maybe, I think I had like 4 months to write it, and I ended up taking 8 or 9 to finish it.
It
I'm a
gave you
slow writer.
4 months for a
Oh
whole
yeah,
book. Wow.
yeah, yeah. The deadlines on a lot of these, the deadlines on a lot of these books are very short. Usually about 3 months, typically.
Crikey.
At least they were for me. You know, I can't. I guess I can't speak for everyone else, but that's typically what I saw.
Yeah.
So it was like, and go,
Yeah.
make it work. Um, it
But
was a tremendous challenge.
it sounds like you had a good relationship with the Games Workshop people before then. Like, you getting help. Well, Lindsay's editing and Alan's
Hmm.
giving
Hmm.
story chunks. So, how
Hmm.
did you come to, I guess, very begin your relationship with Black Library? And you said that you've always been in Nashville. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
Games Workshop is this, at the time, kind of small gaming company in the UK.
Smallish. Yeah,
So, how
yeah.
how did that transatlantic link happen?
Well, that too is a story. Let's see. Let's turn back the Wayback Machine even further back in time. Um, I got my start in writing in tabletop role playing. I worked for a company called White Wolf Games here in the States.
Oh yeah,
The Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the
yeah.
Apocalypse, like that. Yeah. So I started my career as a freelance writer for them. They were based in Atlanta, which was just a short 4 hour drive from Nashville. So I could go down to the studio and talk to them. And of course, there's email and phone calls and stuff like that. And I worked for them for about, goodness, quite a long time, actually. I started in 86 and I was, no, I'm sorry, 96, excuse me. And I was still working for them in 2003 ish when, out of the blue, one of my best friends introduced me to Warhammer 40K. He sat me down. We played a game of Space Wolves versus like Dark the Druchii, the Dark Eldar, um, which is funny because I would end up writing for Malice later. But anyway, so we played the game, and I was immediately hooked, as we often are. But this is really cool, and I delved into the background and the lore, and like, this is great, this is fantastic. I want to write for this. I want to write for 40K.
Wow.
And at that time, Inferno magazine was still a going thing with Games Workshop, and I thought, well, okay, I'll get started by I'll submit a short story to Inferno and see if they like it. Maybe from there, we'll see what happens. So I wrote a Space Wolves short story and sent it in, and they bought it. They accepted it, and then it didn't see print for, I think, a year or more after that. It's like it came out in the very last issue of Inferno. So
Wow.
but anyway, they bought it. It was great, and then I was literally leaving. I was leaving the house. I was getting ready to go to a gaming convention called Gen Con.
Yeah.
I was literally getting ready to leave the house and get in the car and go to this convention. I got an email, and it was from, was it from Lindsay? It was either from Lindsay or it was from Mark Gascoigne, who was the publisher of Black Library at the time. I want to say it was Lindsay, but anyway, out of the blue, they said, we'd love love the short story. Would you be interested in writing novels for Black Libraries? Well, yes, of course I would. Yeah, and that was exactly my face, as a matter of fact. Yes, happily, sign me up. Where do I sign? Um, and that was really all that was said at the time. I went off to the convention and did my stuff for White Wolf and came back. And then out of the blue, again, I was trying to, at that point I was trying to come up with an idea of a story to pitch, a novel idea to pitch to them. And then out of the blue, I got contacted by either Lindsay or Mark. Again, I can't remember which. They're like, we have this series of novels called the Malice Darkblade series, based on this comic that Dan did. in the 80s, early 90s. And we basically, he's got these little comic episodes we want to flesh out into full-fledged novels. Um, and would you be interested in doing it?
Wow.
Once again, I said, yes, absolutely. Sign me up. And it was, and then I learned later, it's like, yeah, we tried 5 other people and they didn't work out. So we're hoping that you can actually, get this done. So I was the last man standing, I suppose. So that was, 5 years, because it was one book after the back to back. You finish one, you start the next one. And then a
And
few short stories and stuff like that. It was the pace was tough.
I
It
can
could be quite
imagine.
tough. I mean,
Well,
yeah, you didn't really get a chance to catch your breath. And again, well, and part of that, of course, I guess, is again my fault because I'm a slow writer. It takes time for me to get to a position where I'm happy with something. Right?
yeah.
I'll write it, rewrite it until I'm happy with it, and I think it works. To the endless frustration of my editors, a lot
I
of the
think
time.
that's so warranted. I write sometimes not to the extent that of a Black Library author, but as soon as
Hmm.
I have the first draft finished, I'm like, okay, well, I have another 6 drafts. You just know it's a lengthy journey. Um,
Right,
but
right.
so obviously, Dan is kind of like one of the stalwarts of Black Library. So
Oh yes.
did you get to talk? Is that where your relationship began, when you got to kind of pick up with him and talk
Yeah,
about his
actually.
comic books?
Yeah, we the again the we yeah, I signed on to the book and said, "Yep, be glad to mail Dark Light stuff." And then they're like, "Well, you should sit down and talk with Dan about where he was at with writing the comic series, and what his thoughts on Malice are, and advice to you about how you can again
Mm.
flesh these out into full fledged books." And yeah, we corresponded via email a few times, and then I met him in person when he was a guest at San Diego Comic Con later. It's like 2003, 2004, something like that. And we actually sat down, talked face to face, and then we'd see each other again off and on at like games days and things like that, where he was obviously a big, extremely important guest, and I was sort of this tag along.
Oh,
He's been wonderful. He's a fantastic writer. He's a really great human. Kind of intimidating in his ability to churn out incredible stories at an incredibly
amen.
quick pace. Just amazing. He's very hard on the ego for us writers. Like, you do how much in a single day? Really? Oh God, I feel so inadequate. But he's been wonderful. I haven't seen him in years now, and I really I
Oh,
miss our talks.
yeah. I mean, I feel so grateful. He actually vouched for me to you, I believe, and
He
was like,
did.
"Mira's
He
not
did.
crazy or anything. Like, give this to him,
No, I
John."
promise everything's great. And of course, I
But
trust Dan implicitly.
yeah, me too. He's just a fabulous human and very, very
Hmm.
giving and generous. And
Yes.
we call him. Somebody commented, Dan Abnett, everybody's favorite Warhammer Santa, like, bring
Yeah.
this joy to everybody. Um, so
Right.
so when you were asked to write about the Horus Heresy, like, had
Hmm.
you read the first few books, or what did it represent to you? Because this was like their new big franchise, like the Horus
Right.
Heresy series.
Yeah, I had read the first book that
Hmm.
Dan had written. And I probably had read the first couple after that. Basically, in those days, um, if you were one of the writers, I don't know if they still do it or not, but in those days, it was great. You every I don't know quarter, maybe every few months, you'd get a big box of books in the mail. So
Wow.
here's all of our releases. Here's all the books we currently have out. So you can just read them, get caught up on things. I had boxes and boxes and boxes of books. It was great. I loved it. So I read a bunch of the stuff. I hadn't kept up with it super closely because I was busy working on my own stuff, and unfortunately, when you write professionally, it's often hard to find time to read, which is kind of a
Mm.
shame. But it's at least for me. I'm speaking for myself. But it takes up so much of my headspace working on the story. I don't really have time to sit down and just shut all that down and
Yeah.
read a book or whatever. Um, I was sort of aware peripherally about this huge saga that was unfolding,
Yeah.
uh, and this incredible intertwined series of stories. Um, and I wanted to be a part of that. But in those days, you could make a request to work on the Horse Heresy, and they would consider it. And if they thought you were worthy, they'd come to you and ask you to work on it because it was a very important project for them, obviously. Um, so naturally, I thought at that point, having only worked on 4 or 5 books for them, I thought I've done a lot of fantasy. I've done almost no 40K. They're not going to come to me anytime soon for Horus Heresy. I thought I had to build up more of a track record.
Uh-huh.
So I was gobsmacked when, almost right on the heels of getting Malice finished, they wanted me to come in and do this.
Wow.
Um,
Well,
yeah, it was. Hmm?
seems like
Sorry.
you're the kind of pick me guy for like bringing on these projects or stepping into projects and like easing them out or bringing them forward, maybe.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Actually, in retrospect, I was yeah, I did kind of feel like he's like, you got this really tricky thing here we need to deal with. Give it to Mike, he'll do it. He'll do anything. Just throw it
Yeah.
at him. I kind of felt like the stunt double that was called in for the really potentially dangerous stunts. So yeah, because there was Nagash also, which happened after I finished the Horse Heresy, and that was also it was Time of Legends, and it was a big deal and a huge amount of work. I get the sense that I got the job because no one else wanted it, but it is what it is. They were great opportunities. I was happy to have them.
Mhm.
Put it that way, challenging though they were.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I guess in a way you're right. It did feel a little bit like I was pick me. I'll
Yeah.
do it.
Come fix this, Mike. We need you.
There's a fire. Go put it out.
Yeah. Not a
Real
bad.
writers are busy. Go do this.
So, in terms of like when you came to play 40K, from that
Hmm.
first Space Wolves game, what then
Hmm.
became your chosen armies and what were your favorite things to play? And then how does that relate to Dark Angels? Because Dark Angels are like super popular, but they're
Hmm.
obviously not everybody's cup of tea. So, where do your like loyalties lie when you're gaming?
Well, the funny thing was, like, I started a Space Wolf army that I hardly ever played. I mostly went to Chaos. I was Black Legion. That was my army of choice, right?
Yeah,
Um, so again, weirdly, never got to write any Black Legion stuff, but they were my guys. That was my army. That was my faction. Um, yeah, the Dark Angels. I mean, had an interesting history, an interesting, mysterious, spooky background, and these occult overtones and secret rituals and stuff, and that was cool. But it didn't really speak to me all that much, in terms of being a player, right? It's
yeah,
like, oh, that's kind of cool, but
yeah,
I'd rather be either a howling space Viking or you know a son
yeah,
of Horus kind of thing. Um, which in a way is one of the reasons why I actually put the Luna Wolves in Fallen Angels because I wanted to at least have some fun with my guys. So I'll make them the adversaries that you have to deal with at one point. But yeah, I really kind of came to the Dark Angels cold. I didn't know a whole lot. I mean, I knew the basics about them, but I didn't know them in depth, and they weren't really something that I guess I was all that keen on working on at the time. But over time, as I worked on the story, I
yeah,
developed these guys are really kind of cool. I
yeah,
really like Cypher's interesting and fascinating, and I love Luther. I really got to enjoy the character of Luther, this tragic, his kind of tragic fall. Basically, I didn't want to make him kind of a two-dimensional villain. I wanted him to have really good, passionate reasons for why he thought he was doing what was best for himself and his world,
yeah.
and yet it led to horrible, horrible things ultimately.
No,
So,
I really enjoyed that part of the book. You could sense the kind of frailty and the emotional dissonance with,
mhm,
Luther knowing he was in disgrace and then trying to carry on,
mhm,
and then having these
mhm,
realizations and holding secrets. And
mhm,
I
mhm,
felt that I really enjoyed, I really loved the emotions as
mhm,
we go through. And
mhm.
it reminded me of like being in a relationship where your boyfriend is cooling off and you're
You're
like,
like,
is everything, you're kind of
"Is he
distant,
okay?"
we've been in orbit like different planets. And but I felt that that
Right,
resonance kind of showed how well the writing kind of emphasized this kind of like emptiness, because you go
mhm,
from Descent of Angels and almost the hero worship and the brothers in arms
right, right.
like nothing. So
Mhm.
I really enjoyed that aspect of your writing. So Yeah.
yeah, really wanted to kind of contrast Luther and Lionel Johnson in the sense that, and this is some the kind of a take I took from I'm being all tangled up. The you always want to come up with a different take on each of the Primarchs, right? There are
Yeah.
these semi-mythical figures. They all have their own personalities, of course, their own origins. And I thought, well, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at Johnson. Johnson was basically Tarzan. He was dropped in the middle of this forest, and he
Yeah.
grew up by himself. For however long, we don't know how long, many, many, many years. No exposure to humanity at all.
Mhm.
So the guy has no people skills whatsoever. He's an absolute brilliant strategist, a leader, a warrior. Does not know how to relate to people at all. I mean, you assume that once he becomes the head of the Legion, he gets these skills, but at his core, you don't know how to talk to people or
Mhm.
how to share secrets, or he keeps a lot of stuff in his own head,
Yeah.
and it's that lack of sharing information that starts a lot of this process
Yeah.
going. If he'd only talked to Luther, here's why I'm sending you home, maybe
Yeah.
something could have been worked out. If he, talked to Nemiel, I mean, all
Yeah.
these moments where if you just said something, maybe it would have turned out differently, but you didn't do it.
Yeah.
So,
And that's so heartbreaking as a reader, even knowing that it can't go
hmm
right, like the process
hmm
of it going wrong is so heartbreaking.
yeah, you see it happen. Like, I can't do anything to stop this. Oh well, the moment has passed.
But Nemiel and Zahariel, I felt were really lovely, like way-in characters in the
hmm
first book, and then, their loss of innocence, or their kind of like
hmm
as the doom kind of descends, or they're seeing things no one should
hmm
ever have to see. I felt that was like really beautifully handled, and they don't know what to do, and they want to trust in these people. So
Right.
so when you have to kind of pick up these characters who kind of they're like probably Mitch Scanlan's inventions, and then
Oh
kind
yeah.
of wear them and make them be the thing that you want
hmm
to be. How do you do that? How do you bring the energy across from one book into your book, and then get the characters to do what you need them to do?
That was one of the really big challenges.
I
Really big
Yeah, is
challenges.
that okay to ask?
No,
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. It's a very valid question. It was really hard to do, and Luther as well. Luther was a real challenge too, for the same reasons. Um, I mean, you basically you take the book and you read the book and you look at how they act and react, and you sort of know, here's how they behave in Descent of Angels, and I have this outline here of how I want them to act or how I want things to turn out in Fallen Angels,
yeah,
and you try to work out how to bridge the two, how to get them to make the decisions you want them to make in a way that stays true to who they were in the beginning, or at least do it in such a way that the reader can see, oh, I see how you got from this point to this point.
yeah,
It was easier for Nemiel because he's out with the Legion, he's following orders, he's doing his thing.
yeah,
Zahariel was much, much more challenging because he's the guy seeing
mm,
things falling to pieces on Caliban, trying to figure out what to do about it. So his journey was a lot more fraught. Luther's as well to a certain extent, but you don't really see as much of what's going on in his head.
yeah,
He's just this distant figure doing his best to keep things together while this rebellion is happening. So Zahariel was really my tricky one, figuring out how to stay true to the character as Scanlan created him and giving him an arc that brings him to where I need him to be in Fallen Angels. That took a lot of the time and energy in writing the story because it really is his journey in a lot of ways
yeah.
on
I mean,
Caliban for sure.
I love him. I think he starts so pure of heart, and you see him,
hmm
this young kid,
hmm
and then at the ending, when you think, "Oh my gosh, they killed him!" What?
Exactly.
I
How
hate
could you?
so much. I hate it.
hmm
Library authors and those twists, it's just, I don't know if they know the emotional damage they're doing. Just saying, like, just
Well,
be
you hope. You're like, I really hope this hits hard, but you never really know, right?
Yeah, but I felt like, again, that was, I mean, Zahariel had so much thinking time. Like, he had a
hmm
lot of like fears and anxieties, and I felt
hmm
that the way that was kind of, I felt the way that we saw his thought process. It felt very
hmm
natural and human, and he was trying to do the
Oh,
right
good.
thing and reaching out. So yeah, I really loved
hmm
that. Um,
Cool.
yeah. So So then, did you get to talk also to Mitch when you took over from Descent of Angels? Was he like, "I'm going to hand you these characters," and no? So
Alas,
it's
no.
even scarier.
Yeah, I was just totally cold. It's like, here's the book. Good luck. Have fun. And I don't know why it came to be that way, but it we never talked.
Yeah.
Don't know why. Just did
Well,
not come to pass.
well, I have not been able to catch Mitch to talk about Descent of Angels yet. I think he
Mm.
has a very crazy life schedule, but if and when I ever do, it'd be lovely to talk to him about how your
Oh
characters
yeah.
grew up, and
Hmm.
how they
Hmm.
kind of became adults. The
Yeah.
other thing I thought, which I really loved, that you did was Caliban kind of feels like a character. Like at first, like the planet's like, it's a struggle and stuff's going on, and
Hmm.
then it's like,
Hmm.
wait a minute, this is a death world, and it's
Basically, yeah.
this sinister core and stuff. And
Hmm.
when I was discussing the book with Ian, he was saying, "Oh no, but don't you understand? The terrorists are Greenpeace. They're trying to claw Caliban back to this beautiful forested planet, and
Hmm. Hmm.
and if it takes chaos to do it,
Hmm.
so."
Hmm.
Because I guess in 40K lore,
Hmm.
we know that
Hmm.
eventually Caliban is destroyed.
Right.
So when you're kind of writing this planet and you kind of gave it this mystical sense, like, yeah, how did that come in? Like, were you trying to plant seeds for how it would be destroyed, or like even the whole fact, about the planet being this kind of spiritual, virtual thing in its own right? Like, how do you
Hmm.
yeah, like, sorry, my question is very, very
No, no,
unsophisticated.
I get what you're saying. Absolutely, and it's interesting the way you use the word planting seeds, because that was very much what I was trying to do,
Ooh,
was to plant some things that theoretically, because at that point you got to understand, you know, no one had any idea how many books the Horus Heresy was going to wind up being. No
right,
one had
right.
a clue where this was going. Right? It was still very early days. So I'm like, well, I'm going to try to set things up with as much potentiality as possible. We know basically where Caliban ends up, but we don't really know what happens in between. So I'm going to plant a bunch of seeds here for whoever comes around later to take up the story to play with, you know, to whatever they want to do with it. There was talk when I was working on the book. Lindsay at one point, in almost in passing, said, "Wouldn't it be cool if you write this, and then at the very end of the Horus Heresy, we do like an epilogue kind of story where the Dark Angels come back and you've had the final showdown with Luther. Like, that would be awesome." And of course, nothing ever came of it.
Oh,
But
that.
yeah, but to kind of go back to the first part of your question, a lot of that about the mystical nature of the planet really is set in Fallen Angels, because I'm sorry, Descent of Angels, because they talk about the taint,
Yeah.
and you've got this mysterious, spooky forest with all these really strange beasts.
Yes.
This it's this magical sort of setup. And I'm like, sounds like chaos to me. Sounds like chaos, citizen. Um, it had to be. You have the mysterious watchers. Keeping an eye
Yeah.
on things. It's like there's clearly something going on here, right? It's got to be. What is this taint? How is it? Why is it causing the monsters? How is it affecting everyone on the planet? And I just ran with that,
Yeah.
which led to, like, again, why are the Watchers here? Well, they're watching something, and it's got to be important. So logically, that means there's something powerful and magical, or warp infused, or however you want to put it, on the
Mhm.
planet, and it's causing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And Greenpeace, which is kind of funny, their whole idea, a lot of my take on the Rebel Knights in a lot of ways was just, yeah, they want to go back to the way things were,
Yeah.
because the Imperium has shown up and they're mowing down the forests and they're changing their entire lives.
Yeah.
They're like, we used to be in charge here. We used to be these heroes, and now we're at best, administrators
Mhm.
running a planet. I've got a desk job now. This isn't going to work. I want to go back to the way things were. When it was
Yeah.
fun with beasts. So you had that agenda, but then you also had people like the Knights of Lupus were like, we need to understand what's going on with this planet. We need to understand what these beasts are and why they're doing the things they're doing.
Yeah.
not realizing that the pursuit of this knowledge will eventually corrupt them because we're dealing with the
Yeah.
warp and the chaos to a certain extent. Um, so again, a lot of that was set up in Descent, and I just kind of expanded on it
Yeah.
through Fallen Angels and used it as a method for you know to kind of how the people relate to the planet, why the planet is important, why the planet is important to Luther, and how it's also these seeds of his own corruption and fall.
Yeah.
Uh, and then
Wow.
I wanted to kind of leave things hanging so that there were story seeds that a later author could pick up with and run with,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
sort of happened, sort of didn't, as it turned out, but that was much, much later in the series.
Yeah. Well, I really felt I know the Imperium mess up every world they go to. Like, I saw what they did to Mars. Mars is just like this
Mm-hmm.
dust of nuclear waste. But I really
Right.
think the scouring of the Shire with this, where you have
Yes.
the
Right.
Calibanians recalling the days of the forest, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I felt that influence of that beautiful fantasy remembrances
Mm-hmm.
going into
Mm-hmm.
like industrial horrible, and the beginning of the hive city,
Mm-hmm.
horrible,
Mm-hmm.
so horrible.
Horrible.
You're just describing I can't remember the name, I'm going to get the name wrong, agri towers, or just these incredible
Mm-hmm.
big towers where you just load up all the people. If you're from Caliban, I'm sorry, you're squished in the lower floors. Oh,
Yeah.
you're a
Have
tyrant,
fun.
come have a penthouse. And
Mm-hmm.
Ian was like, this is the inception, this is how hive cities are made. And I was like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, that was kind of the idea. It's like again, it was more a matter of we know basically how what the Imperium does when it brings the world into compliance, right? It shows up and it makes you part of the Imperium. So everything you had before is just swept away, and they put their hive cities down or whatever they need the planet for, whether resources or whatever,
yeah.
and you just deal with it. You're either part of it or you're not, and if you're not, you're destroyed.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot
So
of people. There were lots of corpses in this novel. Let's not muck about my. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Well, it's
let's
40K.
talk,
I mean,
let's talk about Reaver worms. Reaver worms, which create zombies because they get into your brain and your bodies. And
mm-hmm.
so, I mean, what's your relationship like with writing horror? Because I'm very faint-hearted, and they were
Are you
so.
really
Yeah, I struggle. I mean, Fulgrim kind of made a woman of me. Like I had to get through Fulgrim.
right?
Then Reaver Worms was like, oh, a different kind of body horror. And so,
Basically,
and there was just this one line where I remembered, I loved it, but I hated it. And it was like, one of them has to climb up the chain full of corpses.
yeah.
And became really visceral when I was in those, fighting with them, and there's
Mm-hmm.
zombies and the worms.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost, I mean, there are moments in the heresy books where you go into like the foulness and the craziness of the warp. But that was just
Mm-hmm.
so effective. And I wondered if you'd ever written anything by horror or how you knew to make it feel so like insidious and creepy and wonderful like that.
Well, thanks. I think I got a lot of practice doing the Darkblade books in
Uh-huh.
Warhammer Fantasy, which are dark and very
Okay.
violent.
Okay. Note to self: do not read.
Notice they literally told me that when I was doing the Darkblade books, Mark Gascoigne, the publisher, literally told me, "We want you to push the boundaries of the violence as far as you possibly can." I said, "Okay,
But
yeah." And
and you
I
were like,
actually
I
finished.
got this. I
Yes,
can do this.
I can do this. It did get to the point where Lindsay's like, "Oh, we got to pull this back a little bit. This is a bit too much." She was wonderful. I loved her. She was a fantastic editor. Um, but I think I had a lot of practice with Malice, and then again, also, I did horror games for White Wolf for over
Uh,
a decade. So there's practice there, and I'm a big fan of Lovecraft. So nameless horrors from the beyond is kind of his stock in trade. Um, and I did very much want to, because I wanted, again, this was when they go in and they first encounter the Reaver Worms. It was your first moment of really coming face to face with the rot at the heart of Caliban, basically, right? You're seeing the worm. This is why I chose to make them worms, because this is the rot at the heart of this thing. And I wanted, and the funny thing is with the zombies, I'm like, well, I can't have them just fight worms. I mean, they're kind of bad, but I need
well,
more. Yeah, I need to bulk this out some more. I need more adversaries. Oh, I know. I'll make zombies.
Very cool.
So, and then I figure, well, how do the zombies work? Well, the worms control their minds, and it just kind of one logical answer to each question had led to another, and suddenly we have this. We have
Yeah.
horrid worms and zombies and piles of corpses.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always find it so incredible because these books essentially they're for an IP. If we take it down to real basics, it's for an IP
Mm-hmm.
telling a story that's already been told. But then within
Mm-hmm.
that, my observation of the authors that they pick for the heresy is they add so much flavor and
Mm.
imagination. It makes it feel like, you could have a movie of any one of these books
Oh, easily.
disconnected
Oh, yeah, easily.
heresy.
And that is kind of the tricky bit to walk, honestly. That's one of the really hardest challenges to deal with is walking that fine line between here's what the fans expect out of the story because they've read all the 40K lore and they know basically what's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
And what interesting things can I throw in here that you're not expecting that hopefully expand the story and keep you entertained and make you think about what you know or don't know in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to walk that line because if you go too far on the lore side, they get bored. If you go too far on the new and different side, they're like, this is not 40K. This is not what I expected. I hate this.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great strengths of guys like Dan especially Dan, Gav, Graham, um, Aaron, is that they walk that line really well. They got it down to a science, and they know exactly how to bring these stories to life in ways that the fans really, really love.
Yeah.
So
When I loved it. I hated it, but I loved it. I mean, anything where I'm like chuckling, like, "Oh no, I got to read through this section," I think is thumbs up from me. Then I mean, you busted me like calling the space battle boring.
how dare you?
I know. I was like, no. But, I mean, as someone who's gone through many Gaunt's Ghost books,
Mm. Oh yeah,
I
I'm
find
sure.
it so. I'm the kind of person that has to kind of I mean, this is embarrassing to fess up to, but I will write down who's doing what and the names of the ships in a space battle to keep up because my mind
Mm.
doesn't normally go into those. But again, the whole kind of space opera you're bringing in, and that's kind of spotlight on Lionel, and we're like,
Hmm.
why is he making these decisions, and how is
Right,
he? Because there's times in the battle where you're like, no way. Um,
right.
so I guess when Alan was like, this is going to happen on Diamat, how do you orchestrate a space battle? Like, how do you? I mean, that was like really rolling and like you didn't know which way it was going to go, but you kind of did, but you didn't, like all that
Yeah,
stuff.
right. Yeah, well, that actually, I mean, I'm a big fan of Battlefleet Gothic, the space battle
Okay.
40K. I love it. Big
Yeah.
fan of it. So any chance I can put a space battle in the book, I'm going to put a space battle in the book. Um, and it just made sense that okay, they got to land this, they got to make an orbital drop on the planet, so there's gonna have to be a fight on the way in to get to the planet, so we could have a space battle, yay! And I literally kind of sat down and gamed it out in my head. It's like
I love
okay,
that.
here's the ships, here's their ships, and here they move together and they shoot at each other. Okay, here's basically how it's going to play out, and I gamed this thing out again and again and again until I sort of understood how it was all choreographed. And then I went, okay, so this is basically how it plays out. And how do I ratchet up the tension and make you wonder, yeah, how's this going to play out? Who wins? Who dies? And it was just like a fight scene. It's like any other kind of a fight scene. It's just you got spaceships instead of guys with chainswords. You walk through it. You block it out. You figure out,
Yeah.
who's where and when. Kind of like what you're saying. Here's the names of the ships, and here's where they're going. Here's what they're
Yeah.
doing, and you just go through it again and again and again until you get to a choreography that works for you and tells this part of the story that you want to tell. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's like to me, it's like planning out any other kind of fight scene,
Yeah.
which I do to probably exhaustive and obsessive detail.
I love that you've took it from the board into the pages of the book. And I feel like I kind of bring it on myself because sometimes if a scene gets too tense, I put it down and walk away.
Hmm.
I'm like, this
Really
shouldn't be
interesting.
happening. Like, this shouldn't be happening. It's not going the way. Let me go have a cup of tea. Let me go be mad for a second. Come back. Like, I have to go back into it. But yeah,
Interesting.
no, I loved there was so much contrast in the book. Like I really felt like
Hmm.
the might and tech of the Imperium and the siege engines and the
Hmm.
warriors
Hmm.
versus this
Hmm.
very kind of like you say, the worms, the core of this planet,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
forest, the spirits. So it kind of
Hmm.
makes more sense now that you're saying you write a lot of fantasy as well, because I really that really stirs my heartstrings. So I really see that. Um, I'm just realizing, like we've been talking for ages, and I still have loads of questions. So, so
That's
it's
because I natter on. I chatter.
I love it. I mean, I love it so much. So, so when we have the Lord Cipher who appears in
Hmm.
this, which is
Hmm.
kind of like an honorary rank. And
Hmm.
I understand, I don't know specifically what happens in 40K, but the Lord Cipher becomes this kind
Yeah.
of chaotic individual, right?
It's very mysterious figures, unknown agenda, working for himself. Sometimes he's on the side of good. Sometimes he's on the bad side. You don't really know why.
I know.
And it's just this very mysterious figure, full of questions.
So did you get any inside scoop on this, or how that? Because obviously we have a cipher in this book
Hmm. Hmm.
connected in very much to the story, but were they like this is going to happen later, or anything like that?
Nope. I wish I could say. I wish I could spin out a great story about it. No, actually not. Uh, there were things I wanted to do that I
Yeah.
thought would be kind of cool, um, but never came to pass. And I was never. And some things, characters like that are really big, pivotal characters, you don't want to mess with too much
Uh-huh.
because you want to leave their options open as much as possible for future stories and for games development to take with. So
Yeah. You
you
have
kind of have to treat them with kid gloves to a certain extent.
yeah.
So no, I didn't really have any guidance on that or really suggestions or anything to prefigure for that.
And then
Um,
are you surprised when you see like you're like, hey, that was my guy, and then you're like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, to an extent. I mean, I don't, I don't want to get. It's like, is it really spoilers if it's 15 or 20 years old? Um,
yeah, I know
there's
it's bad, isn't it? Like,
yeah. It's like because you're at Nemesis now, and have you read any of the Horse Heresy short stories or novellas that are also tied to it?
only if they've been going through like so the short story collections which are
Hmm.
in order, and
Hmm.
the Lightning Hall I've read, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
You can spoil me a little bit. You're special. You're one of the authors.
Well, I mean, okay. So one of the things what I had planned to do was, and it was fairly obvious. I think I wasn't exactly subtle about it. Is that there's going to eventually be this clash between Nemiel and Zahariel, right? Because they went about opposite sides of the fence. Um, they're going to clash eventually when the Legion returns to Caliban, and it was going to to be a very battle of brothers, kind of a parallel to Johnson and Luther.
Yeah.
And then Gavthorpe goes ahead and kills Nemiel off in a short story later. Like, really? I had all this and you just dead,
Oh wow.
yeah, so that was all. Yeah, at that point I realized I have no control over where the story is going to
Yeah,
go.
that would blow
Um,
my mind if you were like, this guy had a future. Like,
he had a
yeah,
future. It was all his life was all in front of him and it's gone. Um, but Gav had very strong ideas of where he wanted the Dark Angels to go, I think, and so
yeah,
which is, I mean, totally fair. He's kind of the Dark Angels guy.
yeah.
Um, so there was that, and I was kind of leaning towards. It was kind of funny was that Zahariel was going to eventually become the next Cipher,
Mm,
which actually
yeah.
Angels of Caliban. You know, that was actually the one thing I think purely by accident actually played out the way I planned it to be.
Wow.
Um, but again, a lot of that stuff you want to leave. You want to leave open ended. You kind of know what you want to do with it, but you want to give the next person who takes up the torch as much freedom as possible to work with stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that
and you hope they'll pick up the threads, but you can't really guarantee anything. Yeah, you hope for the best. And again, in those days, had no idea how many years would pass, how
no.
many more Horus Heresy novels would be written. It's like, you'll come along in the end to an epilogue 15 years later. That was obviously not going to happen. So,
But you never know, because I can't believe it's over. Like I can't believe. Is it really the
right.
end? I mean,
Who
was
knows?
who
Yeah,
knows?
who knows? We've got the Siege of Terra. I guess the Siege of Terra is done at this point, right?
Yeah, it's
I think.
done. But I
Okay.
mean.
Where do they go from here? Who knows? I'm sure they have a plan. I'm sure they know where they're going,
I know.
and
I've
we'll
been
have to wait to see.
asking. I've been like talking to people like, so now you finished with
Mm-hmm.
Horus Heresy, what did they give you next? And they're all like, oh, I couldn't possibly say, and I'm like, there must
No.
be there must be a thing.
Oh, there's a thing. I guarantee you there's a
There's a
thing. I
thing,
guarantee you they
right?
have a plan. But so the Inquisition will show up at their door if they say a single thing, and you'll never see them again. So,
But
I mean, I remember during back in the day when I was around writing for them, they would have Horus Heresy meetings where, people would come in from different parts of the UK. They would literally meet in a meeting room in person at Black Library headquarters, and they'd be there for, a couple of days, and they would brainstorm the next, I don't know, however many, 4, 5, 6, maybe a year's worth of books. Like, where's the story going? What can we do with it? And it was all very hush hush and very secret. And I was never invited to one of these meetings.
oh,
I
woo.
mean, yeah. In fact, I distinctly remember I was I was brought over to the UK once to do a games day there, which was great fun. I loved it. Loved seeing everybody in person and everything. And I can't remember if I was working on Fallen Angels yet. I may not have been. I may not have started yet. I can't recall. It was right around that time. But they had a Horus Heresy meeting while I was there, and
Ah,
I wasn't invited. It's like, now you
ah.
can sit here while we do our little meeting. We're going to be here for 3 hours, and then we're going to come back and. So I'm like,
And I
okay.
would have been at the door like,
I was like, what are you doing?
yeah.
But no.
Oh, but I mean, also, if that were to ever happen to me, the pressure of not being able to say anything ever, the responsibility would have like probably killed me. But wow,
You get used to it after a while.
yeah, I bet. But so close, so
Oh
close.
yeah, yeah. But you're like, I know what's going to happen, but I can't tell you, that kind of thing.
I
Like,
think
it's
one of
secret.
the wonderful things about this franchise is the way that authors are so respectful of each other and step
Mm-hmm.
aside and leave strands and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
talk with great fondness about characters or books that don't belong to them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Mm-hmm.
and again, in many other worlds, it might just be an IP book to make money off the game, but people really
Sure.
put a lot of stock and heart and love into these novels. So
Oh yeah, very much so.
yeah, for me, when I get to talk to the authors and like figuring out the muse, for example, like you love those games, so you map the space battle in
Mm-hmm.
your head.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
the magic. That's the value of these fabulous authors and things.
It really does become a part of your life for a while. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I mean, the 8 or 9 months I worked on this book, it was pretty much I ate, slept, and breathed that book
Yeah, I
until
bet.
I was done with it. It occupied a lot of my headspace. So yeah, you do get to be very attached to the stories and the characters by the time you're done.
Yeah. Well, I have some questions from my YouTube buddies.
Okay, I
That
will
I
endeavor to
wanted.
answer them.
Yeah, so Historita Jamaldus, who basically taught me alongside Ian and made me this handy Primark game. So
Wow,
they're all magnets, and I had to match.
that's
Right.
amazing.
So I learned that Iron Hands is Ferrus Manus, and he's known for bionics. Like,
That is cool.
I know it's like
Wish
the
I had
cool.
that.
I know. I think he should make it a game. So then in this book we have Iron Warriors, and we have,
Mm-hmm.
I always say the name wrong, Perturabo.
That's how I pronounce it. Perturabo, yeah.
And they are
Mm-hmm.
known for being siege breakers. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is his first appearance in the Heresy.
It
It's,
might be. It might
so,
be. I don't know for sure.
and he was basically tricking the lion, like, "Oh yeah, give me the weapons."
That actually, yeah, that whole scene where that whole epilogue scene where the lion gives him the siege weapons, that came to me about 3/4 of the way through the book. I was almost done with the book. And I was like, I know I gotta have an epilogue where because it's like, okay, we've got these giant siege engines. What do we do with them?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and it just came to me out of the was like, oh, I
Oh,
know. I'll have him kind of naively give them to Perturabo, not realizing what's going to happen to them. And I thought, yeah, eventually they show up on Terra and are used as part of the weapons that pull down the walls, but he doesn't realize that at the time. So he makes a tragic miscalculation with Perturabo.
I
But
thought that
yeah, that
was
was kind of an off the cuff. It just hit me. So I was
that
trying to
was
figure out what to do with the siege engines.
Mike, that was insane. After all this turmoil of the space battle, all
Hmm.
the stars, you're like, phew. And then at the end, you're like, no.
No, stop. Yeah, that was just one of those really, it's like a moment of inspiration. Like, oh, of course, this works perfectly.
It lends me to believe you may have a mischievous character. Like,
It
but I
just, it just, it just happened. It was just one of the serendipitous moments, I guess.
yeah. So yeah, so Jim says, were you excited to write Perturubo's Heresy debut?
I was intimidated by it for sure,
Yeah.
because you want to get it right. Because again, if this is their first appearance, you want to make sure you do it correctly.
Uh-huh.
And it was such a relatively short scene. There's only so much you can really do with it, and I didn't want this intro to be what the epilogue was about. It was really more about wrapping up the story and showing Lionel, talking to him, and you learn a little bit more of Lionel's ambitions. It was really had to be more about focus on him than
Yeah.
Perturabo. So I had to kind of go, well, I want to introduce him, but I can't go too crazy with it. So
Yeah.
I had to kind of keep it a bit measured and tamped down so it didn't overshadow the rest of the epilogue. But it
Yeah.
was no, it was I definitely came to that with a lot of trepidation. Like, I got to do this right and make
Yeah.
sure it works well.
Yeah, so good. And also Lionel wanting to be the War Master, really, or having that
Hmm.
like, oh,
Hmm.
this way madness lies, don't do it.
Don't, don't do it. This will lead to tragedy, like everything else will.
Everything else. So
Hmm.
my friend Aztec Jaguar said, I mean, we've covered this a little bit. Given that
Hmm.
a number of Black Library authors have written books featuring the Dark Angels, did you find them to be a challenge or somewhat restrictive to write about, given all the established lore and this legion's obsession with secrets and internal conflicts?
Hmm. Yes, I found it quite challenging and intimidating in a way because, yeah, there is so much that's already been established about them. You want to be true to all that. Um, and when you're dealing with a chapter that's built around keeping secrets from one another, it's hard to move a plot along when they're not talking to each other about the important stuff. So you have to make it about that. Why, this is happening because you guys won't talk to each other and you're keeping secrets and you have your own little agendas. Um, so yeah, that was extremely challenging. It took a lot of work for me to think through how to make it
Yeah.
come together in an entertaining way, I guess, an entertaining story.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about the blockers that those people being so rigidly secret would put on the author. So kudos
Hmm.
to that for
Which is
bridging that.
one, which is another reason why Zahariel and Nemiel were so useful because they're the young guys and they're not quite as inculcated in this. I got to keep this all to myself and not tell anybody. So they're asking the questions that nobody else is willing to really explore, basically.
Yeah. Wow. No, I'm glad you had to do it and not me. And then Alberto's written, seeing as Mike worked on script for games in modern military settings and, of course, Warhammer being focused on armed conflict, I wonder how much inspiration he takes from the real world. Talking about real wars is
Mm-hmm.
often difficult to watch and even read about. But does Mike
Mm-hmm.
actively research, or is he perhaps passively influenced by this for potential future projects? So he wrote, this is somewhat a heavy question and English isn't my first language. So if you decide to include this, you better rephrase it better. I didn't, but
Well, I understand exactly, and I understand the question exactly. What, and that's really kind of he's. I think he's referring a lot to a lot of the video game work I've done since.
yeah, tell us
Uh,
about the video game work. I don't know enough about you.
Basically, I started writing for the video game industry in around 2005, doing small freelance jobs for various companies. I did a lot of work for Ubisoft on uh, Splinter Cell. I worked on Ghost Recon Wildlands. That's what he's referring to in terms of modern military stories. Um, that since then I've worked on a game called Wasteland for a company called In Exile, and they're the company I'm currently working with on a game called Clockwork Revolution, which is currently in development. Big steampunky RPG. Um, so in terms of the modern military stuff, yes, I'm kind of uh, a amateur military historian kind of guy. I'm fascinated by that stuff. I do a lot of research. Um, I try to and this is the thing, is because 40K isn't remotely, it's not in the same ballpark as like a modern military operation.
Yeah.
I try to include aspects of stuff like that to make it
Yeah.
grounded a little bit and
Yeah.
a little more down to earth, just so the reader can relate to it a bit better. And that may be a mistake on my part. I mean, that may not have been the right move to make. Maybe going full on, fly me closer so I can hit it with my sword is probably the direction I should have done more with. But no, I do tend to try to keep it a little more grounded, a little more, you
Yeah.
know, that those modern antecedents, so that we can relate to it, we can visualize it better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean,
for good or
it sounds like the research process is such a, like, I guess when you're right, whether you're researching like modern warfare or Warhammer, so much of that
mm-hmm.
then becomes in the spirit of the book. So
Mm-hmm, very much so. And I mean, same thing with the fantasy stuff. I mean, I've been fencing for years. I've done squiring for knights, so I know how to put armor on a person. I know
oh
what
my
armor feels
goodness,
like.
that's so Dark Angels.
Well, I guess in a way that's true. It's like, yeah, I can put a guy in full plate armor. I've never worn it myself, but I've handled it often enough.
Wow.
I've worked on jousts. I've been run down by war horses.
My
I
God.
know, and
So I
it's all, to me. It's fun, but it's also on the job training. It's research.
do you love a Ren fair?
Oh gosh, I've worked at a lot of rent fairs.
I think we
Uh,
get along so well. We don't have them here.
Probably. See, you should come over.
I
Come to the
know.
rent fairs.
I
No,
know.
yeah, I did a lot of rent fairs in my youth. Did a lot of live steel chess games. With choreographed combat, things like that. Yeah, and
So
worked at the jousts and
yeah.
stuff like, yeah, all of that. And it was a lot of fun. It was, again, beastly hot, and it was occasionally dangerous, but it was a lot of fun.
And do you still do role playing games like Vampire, The Masquerade, and actually I think it was a game of Vampire that led me to break up with my boyfriend
Oh
about
no!
4 years ago. I'm
Oh no!
not-
Over the game?
no, but I feel like I was trying to role play in a way that maybe the other members of the group were taking a little bit more seriously.
Hmm.
I wasn't
Right.
being unserious. I think I just, my vampire had a bit of a rock and roll persona, but that
Interesting.
definitely led to the. There were many problems, but that was some of
Well,
it.
I was gonna say, yeah, there was other things, but yeah,
Yeah.
this is the seed where the conflict began. Actually, no, I don't. I have not done any role playing work in a long time. Right now, it's all the video game work is my full time job now.
Yeah.
It takes up a lot of my time. And I'm trying to work on my own novels as well, which is another process.
Oh, so
Uh,
what are the Mike Lee novels about?
oh, well, right now, there's all the Games Workshop stuff. There's a novel called The Poison Tree that I wrote for Werewolf the Apocalypse, that I think is available on drivetrufiction.com. Um, and that's really it right now. I'm
That's
trying to get
lovely.
some stuff started off the ground and published, but it's proving to be a challenge with my day job.
Yeah.
And it's also a different kind of writing when you're doing like an IP project like 40K. You are, to a certain extent, handed the story, right? Here's
Right.
basically what's going to happen.
You
So
know
you
that.
have a framework.
Yeah.
When you're doing stuff all by yourself, it's here's the blank page.
Oh, so
Go.
intimidating.
It is. It very much is.
Oh,
And I never
how
thought I'd struggle with it, but I do.
how about playing and gaming? Because as we get older, there seems to be less and less time for games, and
Yes, right.
you still
Um,
get to do any warhammering or
no,
Dungeons and Dragoning, anything like
no. My Black Legion is gathering dust upstairs.
that? Oh,
I know. I haven't played since, gosh, I want to say fourth edition. It's been that long.
wow. Okay, that's a long
Ages. Yeah, ages. No, all my minis are gathering dust. There's just no time. In terms of role playing, no. But then again, I was almost never a player. I was almost always a GM. Almost always.
That makes sense in many
Uh,
ways.
I mean, I guess sort of, yeah. It's all storytelling, right? And actually, something I tell to a lot of aspiring writers is, if you want practice, not writing per se, but storytelling, role-playing games are great for that because that's what it is. It's an interactive story, and if you're the GM, you get clear feedback. It's like, how's your story going? Is it pacing well? Have you bored your readers? Are they into it? Are they not into it? Why? I mean, it gives you, it's a really great mechanism for learning how to tell engaging stories to people. Now, translating that on the printed page is a whole other matter, but
Right.
for basic storytelling skills, it can't be beat in a lot of ways. But no, my gaming group has scattered to the winds. They moved away. They're all over the country. I do play an occasional game of it's a game called Shadow of the Demon Lord. By it's a great role playing game. It's a great role playing system. If you have a problem with body horror, though, it might not be for you.
Okay.
It's very dark. It is
Thank
very
you
very
for the
very dark.
warning.
But it's a fun game, and I get to play that occasionally. That's really the extent of it. Unfortunately, because I'd like to do a lot more of it. I don't have time. I don't have the
You know what
headspace.
they say, Mike? Once the Grimdark gets a hold of you, you never get away from the Grimdark. So it's going to be there on your.
Yeah, and I'm trying. Actually, I'm kind of trying to get away from the Grimdark now. Honestly, well, it's a lot. I mean, right? I started doing Grimdark stuff with Vampire. Because
Yeah,
Vampire is kind of is Grimdark in its own way.
yeah.
Uh, and have worked on nothing but that for a long, long time. And it does. You're just like, oh, I'm down.
Time for more.
Just,
Yeah, time for some unicorns and rainbows, maybe.
exactly, or at least something hopeful and epic, and I don't know. So it is kind of funny is it having been 15 years, looking back on Fallen Angels, like how I have changed as a writer since that time. Would I have done things differently? Almost certainly.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're a different person. Your perspectives change. Hopefully you've improved your skills since then.
Mm.
Um, that's why it's kind of it's both interesting and kind of cringeworthy to go back and read your old stuff. You're like, ooh, I would not do that now.
I
That's
relate to that. Yeah, I have a
I
10-year
mean,
old project, and I'm like, put it
oh
away.
wow, yeah,
Yeah. But I feel like I'm very, very grateful that you decided to revisit this book with me, Mike.
I am too. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great.
It's so nice to see the character and the heart that goes alongside it. I feel like this is such a juicy, amazing extra that we get to experience through you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll have to next time you have a book coming out, we'll have to just talk
Mhm.
about it, grimdark or not. So yeah, you have an
Absolutely.
open invitation to come back and talk about any of your projects.
It will be a while, but I will take you up on that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike Lee.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike Lee.